Alright. Am I live? I think I'm live. Nice. It's obviously a little delayed on the preview compared to my actual preview, but that's okay. Um Hi. Um yeah, this is probably what like at least one person was waiting for. I have more to say about VTubers and sexuality, and I'll actually analyze it now. Um, yeah. So let's get right into the stream. Hello. Yes. What am I going to cover? So since the last stream was like a week ago, thanks painting. Um, I'm gonna just cover what I covered last time very briefly. Then I'm gonna put on glasses, which I don't have for my avatar with this program. Anyway, I'm gonna be looking at it through a Western lens with like queer baiting and like male gaze of like lesbians and stuff. But there's also the fact that VTubers don't just exist in the West, right? That isn't where they came from, and I have to look at well, Japanese culture and like the context in which VTubers exist within that. So Class S being very helpful, Yuri more broadly, and stuff like anime archetypes and social norms, which, well, I kind of covered that as part of my university studies, so you'll just have to trust me that I'm remembering correctly. And of course idol culture, like I mentioned last time. Then I'll wrap up by putting them all together and looking at what exactly is going on with sexuality, at least from my perspective, and what I think about that. So fun stream ahead, hopefully. um, so last time I kind of went over like, hey, I know how to read sociological papers because I was educated in it, and I had read idol culture papers. Well, a book, but anyway, point is, very interesting stuff, and there's a lot to be derived from idol culture. And there's also the idea that VTubers exist at an intersection of Western cultural norms and Japanese cultural norms. Then there's also the idea of like commodities and commodification of various things. So like commodification of sexuality and the commodification of, well, women. Thanks idol culture book for that one. Queer baiting is another thing that I kind of touched on, whereas the idea that we have people that write characters that are like kind of queer coded but aren't actually queer, and there's a bunch of tropes associated with that. And redacted. I don't quite remember what I meant by redacted on my slides when I made these, because I made them a couple days ago. I think I meant a hololive. I'm pretty sure that's what I meant, because yeah, hololive is, well, a thing that exists. So yeah, let's first look at this via kind of like Western feminism to kind of establish that, because it is helpful. It's not the only way to look at this though, and I won't be just using Western feminism. Anyway, the main focus, right, is this idea of queer baiting, right? So if we're looking at it purely from the Western perspective, right, and not incorporating more into analysis, which we will later, we can kind of see queer baiting as a thing within VTubers, right? Again, this isn't the full story, but we kind of need to go through this to be able to, synthesize it with the rest of the analysis. So if we take it at face value as just a Western feminist looking at VTubers, right, there's quite a bit of queer baiting that goes on among like VTuber talents, I guess, and in their performances. So there's this like, there are multiple performances in which there's this whole sort of like will they won't they, and like a kind of the fan art's kind of encouraged, but is it real representation? Because in the streams themselves, we have something like early Takamori with Kiara and Calliope from Holo EN first gen, where it's kind of it's are they really gay? We don't know. And from a Western perspective, they're not saying that, right? Like they're like tiptoeing around it, right? And so it kind of feeds into my second point from this Western perspective of like, well, lesbians aren't allowed to exist just for the sake of it, right? It's kind of this marketability thing. And so you can kind of see that with the way that Whole Life encourages the fan art, right? And how there's the whole like the ship names like Amesame, Takamori, etc., right? And again, I'm focusing mostly on Hello EN because that's what I've mostly watched. But like there's this whole like marketing aspect of it, which there's more to unpack, but taking it at face value, they're kind of commodifying lesbian identity, right? They're commodifying this idea of these two characters that are supposedly a couple, right? This also ties into broader themes within Western media of, well, there's commodification of lesbianism more broadly, even outside of just Whole Life, with shows that kind of have lesbianism as a thing that exists, but it's not really taken seriously. It's just kind of like a, oh, that's so hot kind of thing. And there's even this idea within Western culture of, well, maybe there's a compulsory bisexuality, right? Because we started off with like compulsory heterosexuality, right? And maybe there's a fluidity of sexuality, especially for female aligned people, right? To be both willing to perform, let's say, as lesbians, while also still being available to men, right? And there's a really neat paper. It's in the references. It's literally called Compulsory Bisexuality, and I don't remember the rest of the title, but it's an interesting idea, right? And it kind of ties into this. It ties into lesbianism as a performance for the male gaze. And yeah, the sexuality is the selling point, but you're still meant to be able to self-insert, right? So like there's the trope of like, oh, some people are into shit like I mean this is a meme, but it's probably based on a real super chat, unfortunately, where somebody was like, you know, trying to go on a date with fucking Gura. Like that's nasty. You know, like these are things that are kind of incentivized in a sense, where the talents belong to the people, but also part of that belonging is this marketing of their so-called sexuality, right? And it's wild. Like, sexuality as a marketing tool isn't new, but this whole taking lesbianism as something that's, you know, oh, it's hot, right? Like, that is, I don't like that. but it's a thing that happens, right? And it's not whole life salt. And in fact, there's my next slide, which will actually be quite helpful in unpacking more. All right. Fuck. Okay. I thought I was gonna sneeze. God damn it. All right. Okay. Okay, but Japan. A very good title to start this slide off of, because, well, Japan exists. That is a context that we have to kind of take into account, right? Like there isn't just one cultural context in which this sort of international media exists in, right? And it's influenced by multiple places. So class S shaped elephant that I can't make a joke about elephant in the room again because, well, I didn't say it, so I can make the joke. But yes, class S. So for people that are not familiar with this, class S is a genre of yuri. So girls loving girls, right? That kind of started in the early 20th century and came back to prominence briefly from the 90s, where the idea is that, well, these girls, they're not really lesbians, and it's okay to explore, and it's more of like a spiritual thing, right? It's more of a learning how to be a good wife thing. And they have lesbian, or, well, more romantic rather than sexual, because these are pure, very pure and stuff, right? So these relationships occur in like middle school, high school, and by the time these women are, well, old enough to be considered women, they kind of abandon this lesbian thing because, well, I mean, it's not real, it's just a phase, right? And, well, for some people, it's not just a phase. Hi, hello. So it's definitely something that's very useful to apply to, well, what happens with relationships among VTubers, because they exist in this context, right? The next thing that we have to take into account is, what does Japan actually think of same-sex relationships, right? And so there's a lot, right? If you're looking at just weebs, it's different, but if you're looking more broadly, it's not really, like, people don't really care as much as long as you keep it to yourself, right? Like, don't deviate too far from the norms and you're fine, right? Some prefectures allow same-sex unions, right? But broadly, it's like, as long as you're just a normal member of society, just keep that shit to yourself, right? So basically, we take that perspective and we're like, okay, so they don't like it being shoved in the faces, right? So you gotta be more discreet. You gotta show, don't tell. Well, not really. It's kind of show, don't tell, but don't show so prominently, right? And so it's representations like class S kind of derives from that in a sense. As you can see, like, it's class S is like, oh, it's fine for a bit, but don't make that your whole identity. So then we take a look at tsundere and yandere, and various deres, right? That's another component in analyzing VTuber stuff, right? So there's like, okay, for people that don't know, again, tsundere is like this archetype where one of the people in this relationship is like, oh, I don't actually care about you, but their actions show that they do care, right? Which is fun. Very fun people. And I think if I say Mori Calliope, you can get the idea, right? And then yandere is like, oh, a person that cares so much about their partner, they're willing to, murder anyone that even looks at them, right? Like, that's not a good trope, personally, but, like, you kind of have that thing, right? And you have, like, I hope I'm gonna say this, but, like, the idea of, like, netorare, right? Which is, well, cocking. Like, that's another thing that we see in like communities around the VTubers, because that's kind of part of it, part of the fun, or so, right? So we have these notions of, like, one character is the tsundere and the other is the yandere, and, like, very overly affectionate, and it's like, that kind of lends credence to the idea that it's a performance, right? That it's just, like, it's not a real display of this, right? It's about the performance of being the archetype, of being the tsundere yuri protag, and the other girl's like, oh, please love me, right? And the main girl is like, I don't love you anyway, but here's like a hug or whatever, right? Like that kind of thing. Takamori. So that's like it's performance. It feels like performance, right? So is it queer baiting then, or is it more than that? Is it like a game of sorts, a performance of a sexuality without really being that sexuality? So that would certainly be more safe within a Japanese context, right? Because you're not really openly saying, yes, hello, this is a lesbian and this is another lesbian, and now they are being lesbians together, right? Like that's, sometimes you don't want to spell that out. Now, one more big point that I'm going to make under this okay but Japan section that I think is really important, right, is where does it intersect with idol culture, right? So if we're seeing lesbianism as not a legitimate identity, if we're seeing it as just a phase or just a marketing thing, if we're looking at the West, right, we can see that there's, well, the idol culture notion of trying to take the idol, right, and displace the sexuality away from them and onto other things around them, right? And so that's fun, right? Like, does that get the gears turning about what could be happening with lesbianism here, right? Like, lesbianism is a safe way to sexualize these female forms, I guess you could call them, because, well, it's not a real sexuality, right? And you can always still have the men self-insert themselves because they're not really lesbiab, you know, right? Like that's the thing. Another interesting thing to pull out of idol culture is something I read in the Bible of idol culture. Well, it's not really the Bible, but it was a really good book. Is this idea of like the idol doesn't have to be super like talented in their own right. They can grow into it, right? And you can definitely see this with multiple like Halloween talents, right? You can see this idea of like they're not necessarily good at streaming yet, but they're growing into that role, into their role as a streamer idol, right? And idol companies traditionally love that because it means that the audience gets super invested in the idol and gets super invested in donating to them, right? Now, if you add in a bit of flavor text, a bit of personality, right? That's some more, right? And so let's combine all that, right? Because there's some combination that we can do. So we have our Western lens, we have our Japanese lens, and they definitely interact because, again, these talents don't perform simply within Japanese context or simply within a Western context. We need to look at it combining the two perspectives because their performance is informed by these two perspectives. Or, well, more than just these two, but these are the two main ones that I think are most relevant, right? So, queerbaiting can kind of fold into class S tropes, as I noted on my slide right there, because it's implicitly like a similar thing, right? So class S initially was like, oh, this is a safe way of portraying this, right? Because we can just say, oh, it's just a phase, right? And then queerbaiting comes in and is like, okay, let's do that hinting. Let's pretend that they're like, you know, totally going to do it, and then it's like, never mind, they're not actually going to, right? And so the next synthesis of these two lenses comes with the whole idea within class S of women as being a stepping stone towards a real relationship with a man, right? I don't think hand fetish, really. Anyway, there's this like idea that like lesbian relationships are less real than a heterosexual relationship, and within Western culture, we have that idea of heteronormativity, right, where people are pushed towards just being part of this like man and woman relationship, when like necessarily that's not the only way to exist. But within this framework, we have, well, a delegitimization of lesbian relationships, and it intersects with this. Thank you for laughing at the carrots. So when you delegitimize these lesbian relationships and you try and have this idol idea of the idol is pure, we can't sexualize the idol, but we can sexualize the stuff around the idol, lesbianism might be a safer way to sexualize the idol and keep them interesting for the fans, right? Because the idol otaku and the anime otaku kind of maybe would intersect if we did that, right? So then, parasocial relationships, right? I can see echoes of this within idol culture, and like the idol companies really push for this, and YouTubers kind of do it as well. Side comment, I am, performing an act, right? This anime cat girl talking about sociology is not the real me sitting at my desk, okay? But anyway, I digress. Like, the parasocial relationships in idol culture can really be seen, like, as I mentioned earlier, with the not as talented idols growing into their role and being molded into their role, including the fans in that process and investing the fans in that process. Then we have this idea of getting raw pictures of the idol doing just normal things, right? Like, does that make you think of a certain thing around YouTubers, perhaps? Right? Like, there's this kind of commonality there, right? That these idols and the fact that they're also YouTubers at the same time, or streamers on YouTube, whatever, right? The parasocial stuff comes at it from two angles, right? And that incentivizes. So within idol culture, the parasocial nature is incentivized because you can get people to buy merch, right? And then on the other side, on the other side, you have the YouTube incentive of, well, okay, you want to see a YouTuber succeed, you want to keep watching them, you want to consume all the content they make because you develop that parasocial relationship of like, oh, this is a friend, I want to see my friend again, right? And there are definitely people that do that. You can see that if you just spend 5 minutes in any given whole live stream. Look at the super chats. Look at what people put in those, right? The whole idea of it is to develop that parasocial friendship, right? So idol culture is very helpful because it, works parallel to the YouTuber culture. And so we're going to bring it back around to sexuality with the next point, don't worry. I haven't forgotten about the sexuality aspect. So, that's a good point to bring up. I'm not as familiar with hostess culture, but definitely I would get your Google Scholar out and look that up if that sounds interesting, because there would be that social engagement as a product that people would have analyzed within that already, that maybe if you want to, you can apply it to this. Personally, I haven't, and in my next slide I'm going to touch on other stuff that we could have analyzed. But blending of lore with the talent's real personality. Can the cast think of any successful VTubers that perhaps do this? Starting with Akiryu Koko, perhaps, or like Mori Calliope, or you know, Amelia Watson. Any intersections here of their so-called personalities and the lore behind the characters, right? Like that is successful because you're seeing, like, the idea is that you're seeing that performance, but you're also seeing the real personality shine through, and people love that. People really seem to love that. And so if you maybe sprinkle in some of their sexuality as well, Hachava, yes, another great example, right? So that this kind of intersects then back into sexuality, where maybe you can get a certain audience to also watch if you hint at something, right? So you can have this dual appeal of, you appeal to the average otaku, anime otaku, right? With this like sort of yuri idea, right? Where it's like, it's just for the lols, it's just a performance of that to appear, you know, more epic and cool. But you also have Bao. Is that's the whale VTuber that posts like, I'm gay occasionally, right? Hello. Yeah. I'm not so much into the ENVtuber space, honestly. Like the indies space. I mean, I literally am an indie VTuber, but I don't really watch as much. Artemis is the main one I watch, to be honest. But yeah, the second audience though that I alluded to. Second audience I alluded to is, well, queer anime fans, because hi, we exist, right? And that's like, you can appeal to that with, you know, this, maybe it's queerbaiting, maybe it's structive titles. Okay. That's, yeah, that's definitely this whole commodification of sexuality, of, because like clickbaiting by using sexuality would fall under that idea of commodifying sexuality, right? Like it's being used as a commodity. You sell the sexuality to get money. Yes, hello, a fellow person that exists. Yeah, so the queerbaiting. So I don't necessarily think though that within like the VTuber space that it's all queerbaiting. Within media more broadly, it definitely is. There's no doubt about that. But I think there's way more to analyze than just queerbaiting among the VTuber space, which this whole stream and presentation is about that, right? That there is more to it. And the next slide kind of ties it all in together and ties it into what I think about this, right? Fuck. There we go. Next slide. So, what do I think of all this? My analysis is just one way of looking at this. There are definitely other aspects, other cultural pieces that I could have brought into this analysis. I found idol culture and like Western feminism to be the most accessible and most relevant to patterns that I'd seen. Of course, if I wrote an essay about this, I would probably focus down on one lens and go really in depth. But there's multiple lenses, and these are just two perspectives. Important ones at that, but just two. Now, what do I think about the commodification of sexuality? I don't like it. Right? Like, that's the thing, right? Regardless of any other things I'll comment on, as you can probably read on my slides, I have more to comment on, right? So it's just an emblematic problem of capitalism, right? Where, okay, queer people are revolutionary, so let's subsume them into capitalism. Let's turn that into a commodity in of itself, right? But if we take a step a little bit further back, right, everything is performance anyway. It's just regulated by the society we're in, right? And so if we look at everyone's favorite feminist, well, my favorite, Judith Butler, right? If we look at the theory of performativity, we have this idea of like, well, people are born and pushed into a specific performance, and it just kind of goes to show the inherent nature of sexuality, of gender, of identity, that it is just a performance, right? Looking at it as some sort of essence that we should be like, okay, this is sacred, right? We shouldn't commodify it. It's like, well, it's still a performance at the end of the day, right? And maybe capitalism incentivizes, and well, to heteronormative society incentivizes one type of performance and monetizes specific types of performance, but you can't blame people for, not, as Butler would say, troubling gender, right? You can't blame individual people for not putting themselves out there. Jesus Christ, okay. That was held for review. I'ma just click the show button. That's literally fine. I've approved the comment manually. But that's the thing, right? Individual people, like, at the end of the day, individuals are allowed to do what they need to do to, well, make money and survive. Maybe in some cases that might appear to be, offensive to you, right? Like someone using lesbianism as a vehicle to make money. But I don't know if they're actually lesbian, right? Like they could be, and this is just a safe way for them to explore, right? Like I can't draw judgment on it. All I can do is analyze the effects of it. That's okay. I mean, it's almost over. I have more points to make, but yeah. Thanks for coming to the stream. So that's the thing, right? Within the context of media, right? I can criticize representation, how it's portrayed, but unless people are cognizant of what they're doing and they straight up say, yeah, I know what I'm doing is harmful and I don't care, like, okay, that's where you can start saying that yeah, like it's a whole problem that can't be solved by one person, and I can't say that this person is, not lesbian and they're just baiting, because all I know of them is their performance, right? All you can know of people is their performance, because you can't go inside someone's head. You can't read their exact thoughts, and doubly so when it's a YouTuber, right? When it's or a VTuber in this case. They could be gay. They could not be gay. Am I going to be a little hurt if it comes out that one of my favorites is not actually Calliope is not actually gay? Sure. But at the end of the day, it's their performance, right? That's the thing, and it could just be a safe way to explore their identity without having to put labels on it, without having to actually come out. And I literally saw a Twitter event. I was surprised it was a Twitter event, honestly, but it was this article about VTubing as a way for trans women, to safely explore identity and safely just transition at the snap of a finger, right? Like, if I wanted to have a male avatar, I wouldn't need to, stop taking HRT for a few months and cut my hair and shit, right? Like, I could just switch to a male avatar, right? Or the other way around, right? Like if I want to switch from a male to a female avatar, like my body might lag a bit, right? Because changes take time, but the avatar changes at the snap of a finger, or well, the payment of a commission, right? And I think that's what I think about VTubers and sexuality. I think that maybe some of them are just doing it for the money and being or giving the impression that you're gay without having to actually say it and deal with being out as gay. A JoJo reference, nice. So that's the thing, right? There's different perspectives on what people are doing with their sexuality, and there might be specific reasons to portray lesbianism in particular, right, as opposed to gay men, right? Like, society in the West kind of sees gay men as a little bit icky. Is that a good thing? No. Gay men just kind of exist, right? Like, they're fine. Not into them myself, not being a man nor into men, but like that's a thing. And the fact that there's a lot more female VTubers kind of implies something about the audience, but like I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt that these people are like, maybe they're closeted and they're not just using my actual sexuality as a marketing thing. And that's only part of it. So yeah, that's my thoughts on this. And those are the things that I wanted to say. So I'll stick around for a little. Ooh, okay. That's amazing. That's actually amazing. Yeah. It's like, in that case, that really smells to me of like someone that maybe is doing like they're not performing it, right? And like, okay, if we're talking about that individual, like there's definitely a ship for that person. And like I don't know if we can ascribe a label to it, but if someone doesn't want to be out, they don't have to be out, right? It's a matter of them deciding if they want to be out, when they want to be out, and if they want to even put a label. Yeah, unfortunately you did miss most of the stream. But that's okay. This isn't Twitch. There are VODs, that just kind of stay there. Veronica's taught a naughty lesson. Oh my god. Isn't Fanana's whole like thing that she's like very like very lewd? Like that's kind of the way that she markets herself. Like I don't know. Yeah, if people want to market themselves in that way, as long as they're not being forced by higher ups, and based on how Niji Sanji seems to work, who knows? Yeah. I guess I don't know if anyone has any more thoughts. I'll stick around for like another half a minute if people want to type them out, and I'll keep an eye to like approve them if they happen to use banned words according to YouTube. Yeah, so that's why I'm looking over this way, because my stream chat's here. Well, it's also on screen, but it's over there. All right. Yeah. This is cool, I think. Hopefully everyone else finds this cool. I mean, I guess you came to watch, so. Jesus Christ, okay. Yeah. I think... Okay, one last thought before I finish this up, I think. That I think is... I've been saying those two words very much. Okay, so my last thought on this that I want to say is very important, right? If someone wants to sexualize themselves, right? If they want to partake in sex work, that's their decision, right? And they deserve to be safe in doing that because controversial opinion time, sex work is real work. I'm no swerf. I'm not a sex worker, exclusionary radical feminist. I'm not a TERF either. I mean, I'm literally trans. It'd be weird if I was a TERF. But that's the thing, right? Personally, I have a bit of an aversion to, being sexual in public, right? Like, the most sexual I'll get is having an anime character with a maid outfit, right? And honestly, I thought it was funny to juxtapose anime cat girl with a maid outfit talking about sociology. My normal avatar isn't, an anime cat girl with a maid outfit. But yeah, sex work is real work. Thanks everyone for coming to this stream. Hopefully it was as interesting to hear about as it was to me, for me to read it. And oh shit, references, they're in the description as well. I would recommend reading okay, so the first reference was helpful to synthesize my thoughts, but Gender Trouble, really good book. That book, Idols and Celebrity in Japanese Media Culture, also very good book, would recommend. And well, that last video link, it's a shame that the creator doesn't make as much stuff because that was a really good video. Alright. Thanks for watching and bye bye.